Hi, everybody. Welcome to this online community of amazing women from all over the world. We gather here to share our birth stories as a means to empower each other through storytelling. I'm Bibi Lorenzetti, and I'm here with Harmony Slater today. She's in Calgary, Canada, and she's a yoga teacher, health coach, entrepreneur of sorts, and I'm going to let her best introduce herself. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Harmony.
Thank you, Bibi. It's my pleasure. I think you did a great job of introducing me.
Very concise.
Yes, I've been a teacher for, almost 20 years now, and traveled to India many, many times practicing there to get a very specific certification that matters to a very small number of people in the world. But also have owned my own yoga schools and been health coaching for a while, and recently sort of moving into helping women establish their own businesses in the health and wellness sphere, whether it's
So
yoga.
wild, the arch of your journey.
Yeah, I feel like an old lady now.
Feels like a 20-year-old with a
think
lot of wisdom.
Yeah. So yeah, that's sort of me. I have one son. He's now 10 and a half, going on 16. And we we're living in Calgary, and we've sort of been together, pretty much full time since the pandemic, which I guess has been almost 2 years, not quite, just over a year and a half now.
So wild.
Yeah, but things are starting to open up, so that's
Are you from Calgary? Were you originally born there?
Yes, I was originally born here in Calgary. I started my sort of, I guess, foray into physical movement through dance and gymnastics, but mainly dance. I trained as a ballerina and a modern ballet dancer for like all of my sort of youth, and traveled to England and Paris to train, in Europe for a little bit, came back, spent some time at the Banff School of Fine Arts, which is a art school here close by. And then decided that dancing was, threatening my life and my health. So transitioned away from that, and then when it ended up, I did some crazy jobs along the way, but ended up studying philosophy in university here in Calgary, and also religious studies, with my main focus was in Buddhism and Eastern religions. So
I didn't know.
Yeah, so I got 2 degrees in philosophy and religious studies. And then during that time, I started practicing yoga and actually Buddhism. And so those two things, my first trip to Asia was to China, where I was studying Buddhist meditation. And it was amazing. I loved Asia. I loved China, actually. It was like, I'd never been in that environment before, that really humid, tropical kind of, Southeast Asian environment. And I remember like walking off the plane and feeling like I've lived here before. It was like the first time I really understood this idea of reincarnation, because it was so weird. It was such a foreign place, so different than where I live. But
and yet you felt like at home.
As soon as I stepped on the earth there, I was just like, whoa. It was like, yeah, it was so intense. And I was like, I have lived here before. I know this place. It like felt like in my blood almost,
Wow.
And I was like, this is weird. This must be past life stuff. This is crazy. So I was studying Buddhist meditation, and came home, finished my degree, and And then I really had this desire to go to India, to Mysore, to practice with Patabi Joyce, who was the guru of Ashtanga Yoga at the time. And so 2 years later, I left and went and spent 5 months in Mysore, India, practicing yoga there. This very specific, strange kind of yoga called Ashtanga Yoga that's quite dynamic and follows like a very kind of strict schedule of practicing, 5 or 6 days a week, and doing a lot of different asanas. It's quite intense. So went there for 5 months and then came home, and I'd started doing a little teaching. And so then I really got into teaching, and then I actually moved to Thailand that same year and lived in Thailand for 2.5 years. I had a contract to teach at a yoga retreat center there, and also to be the retreat center manager. So I went and moved and lived there, and would go between India and Thailand. So again, I was like in, Southeast Asia, and it was really nice, but different, each country has its own flavor. And so that was really exciting. And then shortly after that, I came back to Calgary. This was about 4 years later, and ran a Mysore program here at a studio. Mysore is, again, related to this Ashtanga, practice that we do, where you, get up very early in the morning, and people come in and they do their practice. And as a teacher, you facilitate that space for them and help them in their individual practices. So then there was an opportunity to move to Goa and run a retreat center there. So
what a nomad.
I was very much wanting to live in Southeast Asia, anywhere. Please let me just be there. So I moved to Purple Valley and lived and taught yoga there, and also managed their retreat center for a season, which was 6 months, and then traveled all throughout India for a few more months, and finally eventually came back here to Calgary. But I didn't want to stay here. I wanted to move to Victoria, British Columbia. So that's on the west coast of Canada. It's just up from Seattle or Portland. It's very close. And so it's an island. It's kind of a big island. It would probably take you about 8 hours to drive from top to bottom. But I was living on the very southern tip. And the southern tip of the island is about an hour and a half from Vancouver, or an hour and a half from Portland. So it's like right between the two.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And so it's in a beautiful part of Canada that very rarely gets snow. And it's quite tropical. It has some rainforest kind of vegetation. And it's in a sun cloud. So although it gets rain, it gets a lot of sun as well. So the rain kind of blows through there and then gets stuck in Vancouver. So because it's an island, it just kind of passes over. So it was a beautiful place to live. And that's where I started my first yoga school or studio that I opened with my husband at the time. And we also ended up having our baby, Jediah, my son, in Victoria, BC. So he came into life on the West Coast on this little magical island.
Nice. And was he planned, or was he a surprise in the midst of all your travels? Because that's, I feel like hearing your story, and then seeing how the first phase of childhood is, did you think about that and were like, I'm ready to settle? Or was it just kind of let's do this and let's keep going?
That's a great question. And, when I, my whole life, I really didn't want children. I was not anti-children or anything. I loved children and I was very good with them. But I just it wasn't something that I envisioned for myself, probably because of this constriction, you feel like, oh, you're going to have to like be in one spot and like give up your life. And I didn't feel like being a mom was like, in my DNA.
I hear you. Yeah. I think
So
for a lot of us that are nomadic, it's really not. We're so like of the
exactly.
world.
Yeah. But I remember after I finished that stint in Goa, we were up in Leh Ladakh, which is like the most highest tip of sort of the world you can go to by motor vehicle.
Wow.
And it's the highest airport in the world. It's in India, in northern India, between Pakistan and China. And and while I was up there at this very like high altitude place, like you fly in, you get altitude sickness immediately because it's at such a high elevation. I forget the elevation, but I had this really strong desire all of a sudden, like, oh, I want to have a baby. And it was like
maybe it was the altitude.
Maybe. It was just like really intense and really
wow, that's amazing.
Really overwhelming and a bit strange, but it was just like, no, I want it now. Like,
can I ask how old you were?
I was just about to turn 30.
Okay.
Yeah. So, there's like a biological thing, I think, that happens like in your, late 20s, early 30s. It's like, now or never, come on. But of course, like we didn't have a home. We didn't have like even a cell phone. Like we had nothing. I think we had like a laptop and like, what was in our backpacks. So my husband at the time, he was like, no, we're not having a child right now. But I had been doing like the natural, like, Catholic method. I had been off birth control since we got married, which was, I guess, about 4 years before this point. Okay. So I was like really obsessed with like timing and like the time of the month and like paying attention to my cycle and everything. So I was like, okay, yeah, this doesn't really make sense. But then when we came back to Canada and we moved to Victoria, we started our yoga program right away. We had this tiny little apartment. Maybe it was like, I don't know, 400 square feet, 500 square feet, like this itsy bitsy tiny little 1-bedroom apartment that like,
New York style.
It took like 5 steps to get from one side of the room to the other. And so, but it was home and it felt really nice and it was affordable, which was great. And so then, you kind of start like nesting a little bit and you have this instinct. And my husband and I actually at the time had a lot of problems like happening between us interpersonally. We were going through a really like rough patch and we kind of made it to the other side of that rough patch. And it felt like having a child was, I don't know, like maybe going to bring us together, and like solidify that relationship.
Now that I have a child, I'm like, how does anyone think that? There's nothing that brings.
I know.
At least in the first part.
So yeah, so I was like, okay, it was sort of, we just said like, I said, I think we should just stop not trying. Right?
Yeah, that's what we said to each other.
Not trying. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so it was like, we kind of said that one week and then the next week I got pregnant. Basically.
Wow. So you were ready.
Yeah, there was like a little spirit hanging over me, like ready.
I was like, I better get in now. Before they change their mind.
Very much so. It was, before they changed their mind. Exactly. So, and it was interesting. It was like, also I had a teacher at the time, a spiritual teacher who had said, maybe a lot of these problems that you're having with, in your relationship with your partner is because of like you want to have a baby, like there's an instinct to like
Mm,
move forward and to like have this child, and like he's really like resistant to it, and like,
mm,
so then it's like kind of pushing, like I'm seeking attention
right. Yeah.
elsewhere because there's a compulsion, right?
Right.
A pull.
And it's such an animal instinct when we get that as a
Yeah,
female that it's hard to control. Yeah.
exactly. You're just like, anyone impregnate me. But it's very unconscious, It's
Yeah,
not.
absolutely. I actually remember when I started to really get into, the rhythms of the cycle in order to get pregnant. I remember that once, like, there was a moment where I was like, oh, when I feel this way, it coincides with the ovulation. It was really like I felt like a black jaguar, just like walking in the forest and like waiting for. It was really like I remember the feeling. It's
Yeah.
it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's very, I mean, it really makes me, I think pregnancy out of everything really made me realize how much we are controlled unconsciously by hormones, and like there's nothing you can do about it. Like really nothing. I mean,
Yeah,
like coming into becoming pregnant, being pregnant after
yeah,
pregnancy, postpartum, is like so much of our mental, emotional, like physical well-being is dictated by like chemicals that
yeah,
are mostly out of our control,
absolutely.
which is like kind of frightening actually.
It is. It is. I guess if before parenting you were like a partier, then you're probably better off because you know how to deal with external substances running you around.
I don't know. I'm not sure, because the thing is like I think that takes you on a really interesting like up and down thing, which is
Right.
like a little bit worse than like being kind of steady
Right.
and like
That's true. Steady and yeah. Yeah.
being down.
That's true. That's true. That's true.
It's a little bit more noticeable if you have like, if you know what your baseline is. You're
Right. Yeah.
oh, really
That's
like
true.
dang, I'm really like a Black Panther today.
Aw. So you got pregnant, and how was that? Like, how was the beginning of it into just the whole journey?
Yeah, my pregnancy was very I mean, it was not easy. I did not like being pregnant at all.
Okay. Because of
um,
how it changed your ability to move with your body?
yeah, and like I had before, like in my youth and before I really sort of like immersed myself into the yoga, I was anorexic and bulimic. So
Mm,
I had like a really intense attachment to the
yeah.
way I felt in my
Yeah.
body. And so the first trimester, when I got pregnant, I was about 105 pounds, and like the first trimester I probably put on 20 pounds,
Right.
which I
Your
mean is
body was like, I better gear up to a regular weight before. Yeah.
yeah, but it felt really
Yeah.
uncomfortable for me,
Yeah.
like
That's a lot
not,
to adapt to.
yeah. And it was like I didn't look pregnant, I just looked like fat.
Yeah, I
And
hear that. I struggle with that too, and especially the anorexia piece. And I remember, I mean, before I got pregnant, I felt steady, but
yeah.
I remember thinking like, I don't want to get pregnant for many years because of that. So I can only imagine still being in that place, and then all of a sudden your body just morphing. It's very
Yeah.
shocking. Yeah.
And it wasn't so much that I was anorexic at the time. It was just like I was practicing advanced series in the yoga, and you need to be very thin for
Right.
that and light. Anyone that argues that you don't need to be thin and light to do advanced asanas is crazy. They've never done them because you do.
Yep.
um, and
Yep.
so it was like, it wasn't so much giving up my practice. It was just like that feeling of lightness in my body that I was really like accustomed to and enjoyed, and just feeling like thick and heavy
Mm.
was like kind of like a little bit depressing.
Yeah.
And then the second trimester, which everyone says, oh, you're going to feel amazing in your second trimester, was like my worst.
Great.
Because not only did I in my first trimester, I ended up going to India, and I was practicing yoga there. And I was very aware, like, okay, I just need to not get overheated. And in our style of yoga, often people say you shouldn't practice when you're pregnant. So I just didn't tell anyone. I was like, okay, I'm just going to practice. I don't care. I'm pregnant. I'm not an invalid. I'm not So I practiced and, adapted sort of my practice to like eating a little bit before so that I wouldn't I had energy, and also there wasn't like so much stomach acid, and which helped to keep like the morning sickness down. And it was actually a very sweet place to be because I could sleep and rest during the day. So I slept and rested a lot.
Yeah.
So I'd like do this yoga practice in the morning, and then I'd take like 3 naps during the day.
Oh.
Yeah, it was kind of nice. It was like kind of a sweet place to be. And it was also very social and like a very happy environment for me.
That's
because
great.
I loved being there, and I loved the people I was with as well. My husband and I were still going through a little bit of not great times, so that was a negative aspect for sure. But we were working through it. We're doing the best we could.
That must have been hard as like a mother to not be able to connect in a certain way to your partner during such a like special time, or such a sensitive time, I should say.
Yeah, it was challenging. I felt very alone, but I also was used to that feeling. So I don't think that it was something new.
Okay.
It wasn't like, oh, things were amazing and we were super together. It sort of felt like I had been alone like the whole time.
Okay.
With like a friend who sometimes would like be super, positive and with me, and sometimes not.
Right.
So you kind of like just learn to like create a little bit of boundaries and space there when you don't feel like someone is super steady.
Right.
That you're with.
Absolutely.
So that was challenging, but there was a lot of other people in India at the time that were really it was really helpful to be around them and have like a community there. So it wasn't just like us, because when we were in Victoria, even though we were teaching and we had students, it was really like insular. It was really just us. We didn't have any family or any friends really outside of our yoga community. That's hard, when you're just like with someone all the time and not really like having any support externally.
Yeah.
So when I got back to Victoria, all these hormones that had like started, shifting into the second trimester state. And I started to get these like itchy red bumps that were coming up like in my knuckles and like in my armpits and on my feet.
Oh, wow.
And no one knew what it was. So someone was like, well, maybe it's like hand, foot, and mouth disease.
Yeah, I just thought that while you were saying it.
So I went to the doctor and they're like, no. They sent me to a dermatologist. The dermatologist was like, no, it's not that. And they're like, somehow someone found out. I don't know if it was the dermatologist or who, but nobody could identify what it was. And they learned that I had just come back from India. And they're like, well, it must be bed bugs. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, we think it's skin lice.
Yeah.
I forget what they're called, but like they thought that I'd picked up this like some kind of like skin lice thing that was like causing this rash. And I was like, but like my husband doesn't have it, and I sleep with him all the time, like in the same bed, and we share the same sleep, and he has nothing like this. And they're like, well, you better put on this cream, which is basically like a pesticide.
Oh God.
Your whole body in it. And like leave it on for, I don't know, 20 minutes or something, and then wash it off. So I did that and nothing happened. It didn't make it better. And so I went back and they're like, we'll do it one more time. See? So then I had to do it again. And meanwhile, I'm like, I don't know if you should be putting pesticides on your skin.
Yeah, while you're pregnant.
That doesn't sound good. So did that, nothing happened. Finally, I went to a different doctor and they were like, I think this is just a pregnancy rash. I don't think it's anything to be concerned about. And I was like, okay.
Moving on.
Wish I hadn't put all
my
that
God.
pesticide all over myself, but okay.
Oh my God.
And then I also got a kidney infection. So I had to take antibiotics for this kidney infection. And I was really sensitive. So being pregnant, like, really made all the histamines in my body super sensitive. So I kept having like all kinds of crazy allergic reactions that would just come up out of nowhere. Because like if we had a student who maybe had a cat, like, and they
would pick that up,
and they had cat hair on them, and
wow,
I tested them and like touched my eye would like,
wow,
my asthma was like acting up. So yeah, so the second trimester was not a lot of fun for me. And finally, the third trimester, I started to feel good. And so usually people are like, oh, that's when, women don't feel great. But for me, I finally was like, I'm fully pregnant. Everyone knows I'm pregnant, not just fat. And I feel like there's like another human being in me that we're like not just like this, abstract.
Blob.
Yeah, blob, exactly. It's like real and it's it's there.
And it's gonna come to an end soon.
Yeah, so I felt really good. Like
That's
being
great.
really, really pregnant was my best place.
It's like black or white, nothing or all.
Yeah, exactly.
And so then the third trimester, you really liked it. And did you begin to think about like the labor and birth, or were you just kind of cruising along?
Kind of. I took like a labor and birth class, like one of those, birthing classes.
How did you feel about, I guess I didn't ask you before, but like, how did you feel about the birth part going into it and through the months of it? Did you think about it at all? Were you nervous or were you?
I wasn't super nervous. Okay. I don't know. I'm trying to like connect to those feelings, but I don't think I felt super nervous about it.
Okay.
I think I had like maybe this image that it would just like happen.
That's great. It's the best way to go into it. It's gonna happen. That's great. Yeah,
I don't know. I wasn't like scared about the pain, or I was just like, okay, it's just gonna happen.
Did you have like a home birth plan, or were you planning to go to the hospital from the beginning?
So the way that the system works in British Columbia, where we were, is they have midwives and hospitals. And usually if you don't have a high risk pregnancy, you're not assigned a doctor. Okay. So you go to the midwife.
That's great.
And so I was not a high risk pregnancy at the time. I was 31. And so I had a team of midwives. There was 2 of them. And so all my visits and check-ins were with them. And so when they would do home births, if you wanted. Oh. But for us, because we lived in this tiny little apartment.
Right. Forgot you were there.
Maybe we should be kind to our neighbors. And so we decided to go to the hospital, but in the hospital it was like they have like a birthing center, and the midwives come in and meet you there, and the midwives are completely like in charge of the birth. But the beautiful thing about it is that if there are any problems, there's doctors right there. Yeah. There's operating rooms right there. It's like you don't have to go anywhere. You're already there. And also you don't have to clean up the mess. So that's always good.
That's great.
Yeah,
And so
I
you
didn't
did
really
some classes
see birthing was, until you give birth.
until,
You're like,
right.
this is a big mess.
A lot of fluids, a lot
A
of
lot of
fluids. So you did some classes with the midwives?
It was actually kind of like a separate thing. It was like
Okay.
a, how to give birth kind of
Okay.
class, and, different positions and breathing and
Okay.
what to expect when you're expecting,
Yeah.
all the things. And I don't know, I'm not sure if it was helpful or not. Maybe it was. They want you to like come up with a birth plan, but
Right.
then they're also like, don't get too attached. Yeah, I didn't really have much of a birth plan. I was sort of like, yeah, let's just see what happens.
That's great. That's the best birth plan you can have.
Yeah. I mean, I knew I wanted a natural birth, of course. I
Yeah.
think most women go into birthing thinking like for sure they want a natural birth. Not many go in planning like, oh, I want a cesarean. Some do,
Right.
but
So yeah.
yeah, I really wanted to have a natural birth, and I was like, gearing up, like I can do this,
Yeah.
I'm tough.
And so how did your labor start?
So my labor started, I was teaching a yoga class.
Of
my
course.
my last class before I took like some days off to rest. I taught a lead class, which is not very labor intensive. But then afterwards, we had a intern student who was a practitioner with us. She was going to like take over my classes while I took some time away, like the first 6 weeks of Jediah's, after he was born. So we were kind of like going over some systems with her to help her sort of like step into my role. And so we were having a little meeting, and all of a sudden, like a big gush of water kind of like came out. Not a huge gush, like a medium-sized gush. And and I was like, oh. And I went to the bathroom, and it was just like, it was like that. It's kind of salty water. I don't, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's called, but
The amniotic fluid. Yeah.
kind of, yeah. And so I thought, well, maybe my water's broke. So I called up my midwife, and she said, well, come on in, let's check it out. And I went in. She's like, well, you're not like dilated yet. And she's like, so maybe you're going to go into labor probably later tonight, or, maybe tomorrow morning. And so I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to have a baby soon.
That's nice that you had like a little bit, you're like, oh, I have some time to think about this.
Yeah. Yeah, it really was, because I wasn't in labor yet. It was just like, oh, okay.
That's great.
Yeah. And so she said, listen, if you go into labor tonight, take some gravel, or it's like a motion sickness.
Oh, okay. I was like, gravel.
Yeah. Like that's a brand name.
Okay.
I forget the generic name, but it's basically like for motion sickness,
Okay.
so that it helps you sleep.
Okay.
And so I said, okay, sure. So that night I started to have like some labor pains, and I took the medicine, and it did, like, I would kind of wake up and have like a contraction, and then like fall back into sleep and wake up and have a
Nice.
contraction, sort of like being on a bad bus ride in India or something, where like all the bumps, you kind of wake up and then you like go back to sleep.
Yeah. That's great. I love that analogy.
Yeah, so it was like that. And then in the morning, it was still happening. Of course, my husband was like asleep in the bedroom the whole time, and I was like out on the couch, like waking up and going back to sleep. And then I could still like talk. So I was like talking to one of my friends on the phone while I was like in the early stages of labor. And then finally we were talking, and then I was like, it really started to come on strong. And then I was like, I can't talk anymore. I'm sorry, I gotta go. So then I hung up the phone, because I was like getting to the point where I was not able to talk through the contractions anymore. And I started to have really bad lower back pain.
Yeah.
So I went into the shower and like turned on the water, and the water was like so soothing and just like really like taking my mind off of the contractions, because I was able to like tune into that sensation of the water and the sound, and get my other senses involved.
Yeah.
And so, and then at that point, my mom actually flew in from Calgary to Victoria. So my mother arrived.
Oh, nice. So you
Yeah,
had the
friend of
female
hers-
presence.
yeah, a friend of hers had picked her up from the airport and brought her over to our apartment. And I got out of the shower and the contractions were coming on pretty strong, and they never like lined up. So we couldn't really
Okay.
time them. They were really
Yeah.
like sporadic.
Uneven. Yeah.
Yeah, uneven. But like some of them were like quite close together, and then there'd be
Yeah.
like space,
Was he posterior?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we were like, okay, we need to go to the hospital. Let's go. So we went to the hospital, and like from walking to the car up to like the birthing center at the hospital, I had like 5 contractions. I was like, oh my God. It's like holding onto the railing on the stairway,
3 hours later, you're in the car.
So yeah, it was really intense.
Oh.
And so of course then I get into the room, and the midwife comes and she checks me, and she says like, oh, you're only like, I don't know, 4 centimeters dilated or 3 centimeters dilated. She's like, this is going to take a long time.
I had
And I
the
was
same
like-
experience as you.
And I was like, okay. So
You're like, all that, only 4?
yeah,
5 maybe? Going on 6?
come on. I'm sure it's more. You must be wrong.
You want to try again your fingers? Maybe feeling a little off today?
Exactly. So I was having, again, like such intense back pain. So they have a shower in
Yeah.
the labor and delivery room. So I went into the shower and just was like, in there. My husband was in there chanting Om to me, which was really nice. And I was just like in the shower, just like totally in a zone. I think I was in there for about 40 minutes. And then all of a sudden I got the urge, like I needed to push. Like it was like that really strong, like, and I said, I think I need to push. I'm feeling like I need to push. And he was like, okay, let me go get the midwife. And she like had gone out like to get a sandwich or something.
Oh, of
She
course.
was. But I walked out of the shower, and then all of a sudden it was like I had this huge contraction, and he must have flipped around. He flipped himself around.
Oh, to the straight position.
Yeah, because there was a big
Anterior.
like
Wow.
clunk
That's amazing.
right on my pelvic floor. Like it sounded like a huge crack. Huge contraction, huge crack, like boom.
Wow.
Felt like his head just like boom, like drop, crazy.
That's amazing.
And then the water completely broke
Yeah.
everywhere. And I was like, okay. I think we're ready. So yeah, so then finally the midwife shows up, and she was like, oh, that was fast. And she checks my cervix, and she says, it's really weird. Your cervix is just kind of like melted away, like it's receded really quickly. But there's like one part of it that's
the anterior
stuck.
lip.
There was like, yes, the lip. So she was like, on your next contraction, I'm just gonna pull this down.
Yeah.
While pushing. And I was like, okay.
That's never fun. Yeah.
And that was very painful.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot of screaming going on. And I was sort of also like exiting my body at the same time, like.
Because you were probably in transition, sounds like. Before
I
the
was.
Yeah.
I was pretty much fully dilated, except for
Yeah.
this little lip that was, a problem. And so, and then they were like monitoring his heart rate, and they noticed that when I was pushing, his heart rate was dropping.
Mm-hmm.
So they were quite concerned about him. So they called in the doctor, they called in the whole medical team that started like putting an IV in me and like, getting me ready to have a cesarean. I was like, no. But you're also like, at that point, you really like are out of it. I was out of it. I had no idea what was really going on around me or who was even around me. my husband said to me, he said, they're preparing you for his cesarean. So if you want a natural birth, you're going to have to push him out now. And I was like, what?
No pressure or anything, just FYI.
But luckily I had the OBGYN, the doctor who came in, he was also an acupuncturist.
Okay. Oh,
And
lucky.
so he was like kind of tuned in to like, you know, I don't know, things like not just from a medical level, but like from a holistic kind of perspective.
Yeah.
And so he came in and I remember he asked like, how long has she been in labor? And my midwife was like, well, she's been in like this, you know, 3rd stage labor for, you know, maybe 20 minutes. And he was like, okay. And he's like, what's her age? Like got all the facts.
Yeah.
And then he looked at me and he's like, she can do this. And then
Thank
he came
God
over
for this doctor. He was like your little.
I know. Had it been another doctor, it would have been a different story. But he was really like, seeing the whole picture, you know?
Yeah.
So he came in and he grabbed my face like this. And then he like looked me right in the eyes. He came really close to me, like holding my face like this. Cause I was like, whoo, out there.
Sounds like he was your doula.
He was. Yes, he was like my doula. And he was like, you can do this. And I was like, okay. And then he said, on your next push, I want you to tuck your chin, hold your breath. I don't want to hear another sound out of you. I want you to push through your anus. And I was like, okay, those are great. Those are great instructions. Finally, some direction. Because my midwives were like a little bit hippy dippy. And they were just sort of like, let's let nature take its course, you know? Whereas for me, I much more was like, if you give me instructions, I
can follow.
And this will happen.
And at that point, you're in such a state of here and not here that you really need like firm, like something to grasp to that's like, okay, that's where I'm going. Because you're so dispersed and expanded.
Yes, exactly. So he really like pulled me in and all of a sudden I was like in my body again.
Yeah.
And like connected to like what was happening and like taking actions and thinking like, okay, I'm going to do this and this and this and this. And I had a place to push too, because that was the other thing, because I was so like kind of like leaving my body because of the pain.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't focused on like my pelvic floor just felt like I couldn't locate it.
Right.
And no one really told me like push out your anus. I was like trying to push out my vagina. And it's like, that's not working. Right? So the pushing out the anus was like key. I was like, okay, got it.
I got some practice doing that.
And also in my mind, because of the yoga, it was like, this is like Jalandhara Bandha, a breath retention, and Mula Bandha in reverse. No problem. Got it. So I was like used to locating all those places in my body.
Yeah.
From the yoga practice. And so within 2 pushes, he came out. They used like a tiny little suction on his head to help pull him out. And so it was in total like maybe 40 minutes of like the strong labor and pushing, and like 4 hours from the time we got to the hospital to the time he was born.
That's great. That's very fast.
Yeah, it was pretty fast.
That's amazing. And so then how was the, you know, I feel like there's like a crossing, like a threshold crossing, right? And that you weren't a mother already, because from the moment we can see we are mothers, but you're still one and a half. You have the other one in you, but you're not really yet aware so much. And then all of a sudden it's 2 separate, even though you're still very united for the rest of life, it's 2 separate entities physically. So how was that transition for you, that immediate transition for you?
That's also a really interesting question, because I think for me, I felt quite disembodied still, actually. I felt really like not myself.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just the trauma of birth, like that.
Yeah, a lot of women experience that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then you're like given this baby and you feel like, oh, I should feel love and I should feel like so much like you hear about these experiences that women have, like, oh, I got my baby in my arms. It was just like immediately I fell in love and
I think there's a
right.
little bit of amnesia happening there because I feel like everyone forgets that there's that in between phase of like, yes, you feel that at some point, but right away it's like, if you think about animals in nature, they have to shelter the baby from like all the dangers. So I feel like, the baby's there, but you've got all this adrenaline running in your body because you had to push the baby out. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, is the baby going to be okay? Can I hold it? Is it going to like feed? Is like, there's all these things. Is my vagina okay? Am I going to be okay? So it's like, it's a little hard. I think and I think that's why skin to skin is so important, because then all of a sudden it's like you feel the weight and your oxytocin starts to like begin to
Yeah.
flow, and then you can maybe begin, some women
Yeah.
then feel it, but then I feel like some women, it takes like weeks or even months, depending on what your situation and your character is.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with that skin to skin. That was one thing I
Yeah.
I really took away actually from the birthing course that to me was like, this is what needs to happen.
Yeah.
There needs to be this, like, because the skin is such a, also I'm very kinesthetic, I'm very tactile, and I just like, it was so important to me, that skin to skin connection. For some reason, it was like, I just knew that was going to be like a really important factor for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a little bit it was disorienting. I sort of like got the baby and then you're like looking at it, you're like, oh my God, it's a baby. Where does this come from?
Yeah, and then it doesn't match. I feel like for a lot of us, we have this idea of what it's going to look like, and then it's like this alien looking thing, and it's so frail and tiny, and like,
Yeah.
it's very strange. It's a strange moment.
And he was very thin. He was like just 5 pounds,
Okay.
maybe even a little under 5 pounds. And he was just skin and bone. He looked like a baby bird. He had like no fat on him. He was just like muscle and bone and skin. And like even his face was like
Oh.
not chubby. And then he had huge feet.
Oh.
And I think the first thing I said was like, his feet are huge. And he just seemed like a little baby bird, like this really
Oh.
super, like tiny, fragile, like bony kind of thing. And when he had come out, his clavicle had like there'd been a crack there, like a snap.
Oh no. Okay.
So they wanted to X-ray him.
Hmm.
And so then I was like this whole kind of thing inside, like, do we let them X-ray him? Do we not? Da, da, da. And you're going back and forth, and you're like, okay, I guess we should know if his collarbone's cracked. There's nothing you can really do, but at least you can like know about it and
Right.
kind of take preventative measures of like, putting too much pressure on that side or anything, right? So then he had to go get X-rayed.
Oh
And
God.
it was like, oh my gosh. But I stayed in the hospital that night, and you're not supposed to like sleep with your baby. They're supposed to be in the bassinet
Right.
beside you. But I was just like, screw that. So then I just like had him on my chest the whole time, skin to skin.
Mhm.
And if I was like starting to fall asleep, I didn't want to sleep. I just wanted to like be awake and like be holding him. And if I was sleeping, then I made someone else hold him, like my mom or my husband. I was like, he needs to be held all the time.
Hmm.
And that was like my main thing is like, I don't want him in the bed alone. That's not like good. He needs to be held all the time.
Yeah.
This came back to haunt me later with co-sleeping. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah, I remember that we let him sleep next to us. I mean, there was a whole day in between, but then at night, and I remember we were like looking at him the whole night, and he was out. We were like, "Is he alive? Should we wake him up? Should we?"
Yeah.
Because there's so many things you don't know, and to not have them on your body, it's like you can't really feel what's going on. At least if you have them on you, you know they're breathing. And
yeah, and that was like another thing that I was like it was like not so much like a feeling of like love or like this sort of like overwhelming, like, oh, I love my baby so much. It was like this very intense instinct of like protection, like you were
Yeah.
talking about, of like I have to keep him alive. And it
Yeah.
was like everything in me was about like just doing what needed to be done in my mind
Yeah.
to like keep him alive. And that was like
Yeah.
he needed to be held. He didn't need to be on his own.
Yeah.
And so then even when we brought him home the next day, he slept on my chest, skin to skin. And like we tried to put him in the bassinet to sleep, and it was exactly those feelings. Like, is he alive? Is
Yeah.
he breathing? Is he? And I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm never gonna sleep.
Yeah.
I'm just literally gonna like sit here and like listen to him breathe. And so I was like, screw this. He's sleeping on my chest. At least I can feel him breathing, and that will
Yeah.
like. And also like I had this whole idea about the heartbeats, the baby feeling the mother's heart beating and hearing the mother's heart beating, and that this is a sound that he's used to.
Yeah.
And so I was like, he's going to sleep on my chest so he can hear my heart beating, and he'll feel like connected still. He'll
Yeah.
feel
Something
like,
is still the same with all these other things are changing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's great.
he literally slept on my chest like that for 3 years. Not necessarily skin to skin, but definitely those first 3 months, it was skin to skin.
Wow, bless your soul for that patience for that amount of time. I have my toddler, I guess, 15 months is like, he started to nurse in these weird formations. Like he'll start with his body like this, and then he'll like, and then he'll be with his stomach on my head, and I'm just like, great.
Yeah.
This is a good place. This is a good place to be.
Exactly.
So wow, until 3, that's something.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so then how was, when you went home, how was that initial transition, and how, I mean, I'm curious at first of that initial transition, how was that for you?
Yeah, it was pretty weird. I kept thinking like someone's gonna come pick up this baby at any moment. I remember saying that, like who left this baby at our house? Like, when are they coming to get him? I just didn't really feel like, I mean, you feel connected, but
but also not. Yeah, I remember that.
What the heck?
Yeah, and there's this deep sense of almost emptiness that's paired with like, I don't know, I remember, like, the emptiness, and then you feel like really full and wholesome, and then again really empty. I feel like that was like something came up a lot.
Yeah, and I remember really like crying at one point, kind of breaking down, like I didn't expect it to be like this. And my mom was still there. She stayed with us like the first couple weeks after, which was really helpful because she was like always like with him. So he was always with someone, and it also gave me some time to like sleep a little bit and have a little space to catch up on sleep.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she was like, well, what did you think it was going to be like? I said, I don't know.
Well, no one really tells you. Everyone's just kind of like, oh, you fall in love and it's so great. And it's really not. I mean, it is, but it's really also not. It's both.
Yeah. It's really, I think, up and down. There's so many hormones. And my one friend who had a baby, before me, she told me that. She said, listen, your hormones are really intense afterwards, and nobody talks about it. Nobody says that, like, you're going to feel really terrible some days, and just like go through it. Just like, don't pay too much attention to it. Just like try and surf those waves. And I was like, okay, good advice.
Did you, you didn't take your placenta with you, right?
I did not, no. I
feel like that was a huge, at least for in my experience and other women that I've talked to, like consuming your placenta in some way or form kind of helps sail through that, initial postpartum phase a little bit more evenly, because you're consuming those hormones again. So without it, it's really just like plummeting.
Yeah. And the breastfeeding was really hard for me too. The first 6 weeks, it was very challenging. I felt like I was having like shredded glass going through my nipples every time I breastfed. which was also, but like I was super determined to breastfeed. I was like, I'm doing it. And so I went to like a breastfeeding specialist, and she was like, make sure he's latching properly, and like, but still my cousin was like, listen, just make it through the first 5 weeks. If you do the first 5 weeks, you'll be fine. And I was like, okay. But it was like breasts were getting engorged, and we're putting like the cabbage on them to like, try and like soothe the inflammation. And but then after 6 weeks, it was like, like nothing. It was great.
Oh, good.
The first 5 to 6 weeks was like very painful, very excruciating. And he was breastfeeding a lot, because also I felt like my milk supply wasn't so abundant. So then I was also trying to take, what was it? Milk thistle and fenugreek, I think. So I was taking these supplements to try and like, increase my milk supply. And I was also pumping as well, even though he wasn't drinking the milk, because
just to get it going. Yeah.
Exactly. So that was another like sort of layer of of like, what the,
oh man,
you feel so like disconnected from your body.
Yeah.
You feel like your body's just like a food machine or something, you know, and it's not really yours, and it doesn't belong to you, and it's
and it's not what it was before, and it's not what it was when it was pregnant. So it's this weird, funky in between.
And it's very functional. It's just like, I don't know. There's a lot of dissociation going on, like completely disconnected really from my body in a weird way, like doing all this stuff to it to try and like, get it to this other state that it wasn't in. And then also like you have this child that you're sort of, you're like, okay, wow, I think I love him. But like, I'm not really in my body right now, so I can't really tell you a lot about what's going on internally.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a confusing time. Oh my goodness.
And I also felt like part of me had died, like that my whole life before giving birth was gone. That when I gave birth and went through that experience, that, I mean, it is a trauma, I would say, even though it's a natural trauma, it's pretty traumatic.
And if you put it so well, it is a death.
Yeah.
And a rebirth.
Yeah. And so then I felt like, I was like, I don't even know who I am. I don't know what this new life looks like. Like, I'm just learning. I'm like, I've been reborn almost with him. Yeah. And so, which I think was kind of a helpful way to frame it, because it was like just a complete letting go and a loss of what was before. Yeah. And
there's this school of thought called birthing from within. They talk about pregnancy being the preparation, labor and birth being the descend, and then motherhood being the rise or the rebirth or something like that. And it's so true. That's just what you said, of just like, not who am I?
Yeah. And like allowing yourself to become something new, to discover yourself again, and to be like, okay, what's natural for me now? What's organic for me now? What's going to help me now? Like allowing yourself that time and space to explore and discover and be curious about even your own self, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I feel, you probably know best because you're in year 10 of it, but it's probably an ongoing process, because they keep changing. It's not like once you get through, it's like, oh, okay, now they're a stable human. Fine, I'm going to go back. They're continuing to change. So you're continuing to change with it. So it's never.
It's a continual process, I think, of discovery and also like working on yourself, because then they start to reflect yourself back to you, and you're like, oh man, I'm a real asshole. Right? Like, I better clean that up.
Oh man, absolutely.
You hear yourself being repeated, and you're like, uh-oh.
I feel like I had all these plans of like the type of mother I wanted to be, even just in those beginning phases of like no swing, mattress on the floor, no pacifier, and all of a sudden no sleep training. And like I saw even just within the first year, just like each thing just, oh, I guess it's going to be pacifier. Oh, okay, I need to sleep. I guess we're going to sleep train. Oh, he's not sleeping. Okay, let's get a swing. Like all those things you just need to survive, and you just need to,
Totally. Yeah, we tried bottle feeding him. He didn't want the bottle. We tried giving him the pacifier. He spit it out. He's so like, even
knows
today,
what he wants.
so specific about like what he puts in his mouth.
Yeah, and the feeding is a whole other thing.
It was, and the feel, he's very sensitive to like things. It's really interesting. You see these things like from when they're even born. I mean, his nervous system was very sensitive when he was born. I think just because he was so like skinny and small and, but also like the fact he didn't like anything artificial. And like even today he's really into texture. Like if something has a weird texture or like he won't eat it. He doesn't like it, or like he'll feel things like clothing or even like a toy or something, and he'll touch it. And when he was really small, he didn't want other people to touch his toys because he's like, no, it changes the way they feel.
Wow.
And we were like, okay.
That's very specific. I've never heard that. That's amazing.
Yeah, He was like, don't touch that. And we're like, what? He's like, don't touch it. And I was like, why? And he's like, it changes the way it feels. And I was like,
wow. Okay. That's so amazing it's the energy of things. Wow.
That's so incredible. Then he's like, now he'll touch something, and if he likes it, he's like, oh, it's so satisfying. Then he'll be like, we were going in the lake the other day, and he's like, Mom, isn't this so satisfying? It feels so good. Like he's so tactile.
Oh, that's so sweet. Is he a Taurus?
No, he's an Aquarius.
He's an Aquarius, okay. Yeah, because usually Tauruses are really sensitive in that way to like all things. That's amazing. And so how do you feel, how do you feel it changed you as a person, being the nomad that you were, and your relationship, and just a little bit about that. We didn't have to go too deep into it, but just before we close, I just want to hear a little bit about how you feel like it transformed you and continues to transform you.
I mean, as you know, when you're like just a couple with your child and you both are working, I mean, we had our yoga school that we had taken on a lease for just before he was born. And so we were doing like a lot of handing off back and forth. Yeah. So in a way, our relationship was a little bit, it was already a bit strained, but it was kind of good for our relationship in a way because we weren't really like in each other's space.
Right.
Because we were going back and forth, but also I think that the distance or the stuff that wasn't working was still just not working. We just weren't having to deal with it or look at it.
Right.
So that was sort of an interesting dynamic. We didn't spend a lot of time together, the three of us. It was usually like one or the other. And I started traveling again with him going back to India. So when he was really small, he went back to India like every year with me for a couple of months. Sometimes one year we were there for 5 months, like 2 months and then 3 months, which was great because it was so fun to travel with him as a kid. And I took him to South Africa and Israel. And
wow.
I loved traveling with him as a child. And I would always take him back to Calgary because I was doing a little bit of teaching in Calgary at the time while we were living there. So him and I went on tons of flights together, just him and I.
Wow.
And it was some of my favorite times, actually, was just like me with him on the airplane.
That's amazing. I just traveled with mine for the first time, and I was like, I am never going to do this again. And I'm so sad because I love traveling, but it was, wow, I'm so happy you had such a positive experience.
You know what? It's hard when they're under 2. It gets a lot easier when they get a little bit older.
That's good to know.
The problem is you have to pay for the extra plane ticket.
Right. Yeah.
But like when he was under 2, I remember I just like basically breastfed him almost the entire trip, and then he slept, and then I breastfeed him and he's sleep. Like it was just like constant breastfeeding and sleeping. When he got a little bit older, like just over the age of 2, he would like watch shows.
Right.
So he would watch like Dora the Explorer or something on a little iPad. And then he'd get bored, and then we'd like walk around the plane a little bit and then come back, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then of course as he got older, it gets a little easier because they're able to like sit for longer periods of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
But one trip he got really sick, and that was the worst. That was like the worst, because we were on the way home from India and he started throwing up and like threw up all over me, all over the floor. And it was just me. And I was like, you know, flight attendants aren't what they used to be. I'll tell you that much. I was like, can we get a cloth? Can we get anything? Like, can you help at all?
Oh.
But yeah, but it was he's a good little traveler that way for sure. But now he doesn't want to travel anymore, so that's like a whole other element. You know,
he's having the opposite reaction.
Yeah, he has his friends, he has his activities, he has his school, he doesn't want to miss, you know.
That's great.
Yeah, it's definitely put a damper. If I want to travel, I go by myself, unless it's to Disney World or something.
So what would you want another woman to walk away with from your experience? Like, what do you think is some things that are really important going into birth, but also into motherhood from such a cosmopolitan world traveler?
Yeah. I think go with the flow, you know, try not to like put your expectations or anticipations onto how things, you know, how you want things to be, or even how you think things should be, and allow yourself that space to let whatever is come to you, you know, and just like kind of sort of be in the space of allowing. And rather than feeling like things have to be done a certain way, or that things should be done a certain way. And, you know, what works for one person isn't going to work for you. And what works for you might not work for other people. And I think that that's really important to just kind of find your own way and your own path, and listen deeply to that, to what's guiding you. You know, I know like even with vaccinations, there was like, you know, there's a lot of pressure to like do this thing that, you know, society wants you to do. And for me, I was like, he's 2 months old and he's underweight and I don't want to do it. And so, you know, you kind of have to find that voice to stand up for yourself. It was like, it's not that I don't think that, you know, vaccines are bad or anything. I just don't want it for my child right now.
Yeah.
You know, and like being able to like, to express what you're feeling, I think. And it can be like that for anything, you know, it can be like that. People would say, oh, you shouldn't, you know, he shouldn't sleep on you. And it's like, you know what? That's working for me. It's fine. You know, someone said, oh, you should put him in daycare. I'm like, no, I don't want to put him in daycare. Okay. I didn't have a kid to put him in daycare. Like, you know, everyone has an opinion about how raise your kid, what you should do, the best things to, you know, and maybe it's based on their experience. Maybe it's based on how they feel like society should be, or, you know, they want to help you in some way. But, you know, sometimes you have to kind of just really tune out a lot of that advice, I think, and tune into what, you know, what you want, what's going to work for you in your life. And also allow it to be new, you know, allow yourself to be surprised by what's working.
Which I feel like I love that advice, and I feel I want to add to that because I'm in the thick of it. I feel like it's really refreshing to hear say, but it can be really hard to embrace, because I know, like, for instance, my toddler now is not eating and everyone's like, oh, they're going to eat later, and like, don't worry about it. And when you're in the thick of it, it can feel like, oh my God, he's going to die, or he's going to have a malfunction because he's not doing this. So it's really, I feel like we need to post-its everywhere as new moms that like, it's going to be okay. It's a phase. It's going to pass, you know? And so I love that. And I think, as new moms, it's okay to feel like it's the end of the world, but really you're 10 years in and he's okay and he's alive and you're okay.
he functions just fine. I mean, he used to run all the time. He never walked. He as soon as he learned how to walk, he was running. It was
Great.
He could run before he could walk. I swear to God. And so feeding him was if I tried to sit him in a chair and feed him, like you're saying, he wouldn't eat.
Oh, great.
So he would because he just wanted to move and run and be active. And so I literally would stuff things into his mouth.
He's running and you're like, okay, go.
And it was literally, I would hold him and eat this. And then, okay, go.
Yeah.
And I'm sure my mother-in-law thought I was insane. You need to sit him at the table and put him in his chair and have him eat his food like a proper boy. And I'm like, he won't eat that way.
Right.
So I'm just trying to keep him alive. Okay. Just trying to keep him alive.
And he's 10 now. So you've succeeded. Yay.
So far.
Success story.
We still have those teenage years, it's my whole purpose, keep them alive, just keep them alive.
Oh man. So
yeah, you just have to kind of, I think, be adaptable and I don't know. For me, that's also my personality. I don't like to enforce things on other people so much, and of course that's going to play into my parenting style also.
Yeah, absolutely.
My sister-in-law is very happy to enforce rules on other people and other things. So she has a very different parenting style than I do.
Oh.
So, it's you kind of, I think your personality shows up in these things, in the way that you approach motherhood. And it's good to kind of just reflect on that and also allow for it that this is kind of my personality and I'm sort of go with the flow and adapt to the situation and the circumstances. I think it comes with traveling a lot, right? You learn oh, I can't really enforce my values or the way I think society should be on this situation. So I'm just going to kind of go with it and observe and see what happens.
That's great.
You don't have that experience and you've always lived in a very predictable way. It's easier to try and make people fit into those predictable patterns. You feel more comfortable doing that.
But then it might be harder to let go of the walls when the baby doesn't fit in the walls.
Yes, exactly.
So it's very refreshing. And so if someone wants to find you and connect with you, how can they do that?
Yeah.
And I'll put it in the show notes as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, the best way is probably through my website, harmonyslater.com. And you can send in a contact form or send me an email through there or harmony@harmonyslater.com. So, yeah.
And are you on Instagram?
I am on Instagram.
I mean, who knows how long these things are going to last, but I'm sure for the next couple of years.
Yes, and you can listen to our podcast. We have a couple podcasts with you, Bibi. That's the Finding Harmony podcast. And you can find me on Instagram at the Finding Harmony podcast. That's my handle, or at Harmony Slater Yoga. Okay, wonderful. Well, Harmony, thank you so much for sharing all these amazing things today. I love the journey of you. So journeying. And I can't wait for everybody to hear it. And thank you for sharing your time with us. Well, thank you, Bibi. I wish you all the best. Bye.